So I would consider season 4 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as one of the best written seasons of television I've ever seen. But what makes this season so great is that every single event that happens is linked together and explored later on in the season. This, combined with their later time slot, which allowed them to explore darker themes, made for one of the most masterful pieces of TV writing. And I'd like to break that down for you. But in order to do that, you're going to need to understand what pod writing is. First of all, pod writing is not an industry standard term, and is more so a term used by the writers on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. However, despite my research, I couldn't actually find where the writers have said this term. I'm assuming it was in an interview within the last decade, but whenever I searched up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. pod writing, just the episode list came up. Despite this, pod writing is incredibly similar to the way that arcs work in anime and manga. The pod is a small storyline that is used to cover specific information, character development, or world building that moves the plot forward until we reach the next pod. In Season 4 specifically, there are 3 pods: the Ghost Rider pod, the LMD pod, and then the Agents of Hydra pod. Each pod on its own is distinct and is working in what seems to be different directions to each other. However, when put together, it shows that each pod was working towards the same ending, where all these different pods come together and make an incredible, complex, yet simple to follow storyline. But in order for us to figure out how pod writing can help our own writing, let's actually break down Season 4 and see what they were doing which made the season so good. The first pod of this season is the Ghost Rider pod. This pod sets us up with a few main players that we will need to keep our eyes on: the Ghost Rider, the Darkhold, Ada, LMDs, and then the Framework. All of these will be thoroughly explored throughout the entire season, but Ada, the LMDs, and the Framework are only mentioned or have a scene or two. The emphasis is still on Robbie Reyes and trying to destroy the Darkhold. This entire pod is starting to show us the magical side of the world, while also hammering in how dangerous, ambitious scientists are, as well as giving us heartbreaking but also tender moments between our main cast. Near the end of this pod, we witness Ada reading the Darkhold and actually be influenced by it. The last scene of this pod is actually Ada killing an agent while May is unconscious in a closet. This perfectly segues into the next pod, while also revealing who the major villains of the season are going to be. The middle pod of this season is the LMD pod, or as I like to call it, the only Secret Invasion adaptation that Marvel Studios has ever done. This pod immediately follows on from the last as we get Ada trying to get the Darkhold, and then the reveal that May has been replaced with an LMD. This is also the pod where we get a lot more of the Watchdogs, an organisation which has been around for a few seasons at this point. While we have a few smaller plot points in this pod, like Jeffrey Mace being a fake Inhuman, and, like I said earlier, the Watchdogs, the main focus is on the LMD version of May and how Ada and Dr. Radcliffe are keeping May in a simulation. A key moment in this pod and the season plotline is Ada creating a simulation where May has saved the kid in Bahrain. As this pod progresses, more and more characters start to get taken and be revealed as LMDs, which leads to our climactic episode of Self-Control. We as the audience are in the dark on who has been replaced in an LMD and who hasn't, though we quickly figure out that Coulson, Mac, and Mace have been replaced, and they are also aware that they are LMDs. However, Fitzsimmons can never be happy, and it's then revealed that Fitz is an LMD in one of my favourite moments of all time. Genuinely, such great acting from Ian DeCasticker. Daisy and Simmons take a crew and then decide to go into the simulation that Ada has created, known as the Framework, and when they get in, it is the worst possible world you can think of. And that leads us into our final pod, Agents of Hydra. For half of this pod, we are inside the Framework, as we see the cast have to battle with the programming they've experienced versus the potential heart that they may be feeling. The inclusion of Coulson sometimes remembering things is super important and ties back into Season 1 and 2, with him being brought back to life. They also bring back some beloved characters such as Trip, and some less beloved characters such as Ward. Unironically, I really liked them bringing back Ward, and the kind of upsetting realization that if he had been picked up by anyone other than Garrett, then he might have actually been a good man. But I digress. They all end up getting outside the Framework and have to deal with them being enemies of the state. Despite Talbot actually believing the group, he gets shot by an LMD version of Daisy, and I'm so surprised that he lived. They also end up bringing back the Ghost Rider, who helps them destroy Ada, and then he disappears off with the Darkhold. Their Framework is shattered and everyone inside dies, including Dr. Radcliffe, and then the final scene sets us up for Season 5. But how does this help us? Well, the pod writing is a guaranteed way to make sure you are spending enough time with all the ideas that you may have. If you split your 22 episode season into 3, you get around 7 to 8 episodes for each pod, and that is most certainly enough. It can help you focus on more specific characters or plot lines while also foreshadowing or making reference to future ideas that may be coming. Pod writing is so much more common than you may think too. Back when TV shows were made for live TV and not streaming, many shows had A or B parts to a season, usually split up by a mid-season break. I know the Vampire Diaries did this, so did Teen Wolf, and if I remember correctly, the Arrowverse CW shows also did this. But like I said, anime and manga do this regularly. Arcs, or pod writing, is a common way to break down an extremely long series into smaller, more digestible parts. Not only is it easier for an audience, it's also easier for writers. Writing scripts can be a grueling task, especially if you're trying to fit too many ideas into one season. But by splitting them into smaller ideas heading towards a final goal, suddenly your workload is so much more manageable. You can take more time with character moments and still have time for a filler episode or two instead of being extremely plot heavy and rushing through it all. I'm aware these are probably unfair comparisons since the streaming world is only set on giving shows 8 episodes, but Arcane Season 2 and Has-Been Hotel could have benefited from this type of writing. Arcane was almost there when they were releasing their episodes in 3 acts, but the agency in Season 2 dissolved because they had too many ideas they were trying to play with. Has-Been Hotel's writing has a different issue, and that's that it has no time. Like, why are we getting a war arc in Season 1? Has-Been would have benefited by having those 8 episodes be split into 2 pods. One to set up the hotel and the characters and have fun moments, and the second to start seeing the uprising against the angels. Then in Season 2 we could bring in Lucifer and then start the war arc in the 4th pod. My advice after analysing pod writing is don't be afraid to take your time when plotting out your story. Having time with characters or having an episode that is not plot heavy is important, since that's what gets us attached to your characters. Working in a pod writing scheme will also mean that you will have the time and you don't have to rush your audience through the plot either. You can all breathe. If you're wanting to understand a bit more about pod writing, I suggest looking at either Season 2, 3 or 5 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. These seasons do work with a 2-pod system rather than the 3-pod system in Season 4, but do have a lot of the same setups and payoffs that I've been talking about here. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. I'm still getting used to analysing media, so if you have any advice or tips you'd like me to start doing, please let me know, and I will see you in my next one.